The alien girl moved silently through the cracked streets of the abandoned city, her long ears twitching at every distant hum and whisper of the wind. The buildings leaned at odd angles, metal frames twisted and glass panes jagged, but she ignored them. Her eyes were closed not because she couldn't see, but because seeing felt like acknowledging the world's betrayal. Even the faint hum of neon signs flickering in broken loops felt like noise she wasn't ready to process. She stepped over a puddle of iridescent sludge that shimmered like spilled oil, careful not to disturb the slow, quivering shapes moving beneath its surface. She knew they weren't alive in the way humans thought of life, yet they pulsed, reacted, as if the city itself had a heartbeat she could feel with her ears. A small robotic maintenance drone stumbled past, its single glowing eye flicking nervously in her direction. It tilted forward, its mechanical arms flailing slightly before crashing against the wall with a squeak that echoed. She suppressed a smile. For once, the universe seemed to be offering her a comedy routine rather than a tragedy. "Really?" she muttered under her breath, her voice a soft hum that vibrated against her throat in a way humans couldn't detect. "You couldn't have crashed somewhere else?" The drone's eyes spun and then shut down entirely, as if it agreed, and she continued walking, long ears swaying like delicate antennae, catching sounds most creatures would miss. Somewhere in the distance, a stray cat in a hovering exosuit zoomed past, its tiny metal claws clicking against the uneven pavement. The suit's thrusters sputtered and hiccuped midair, causing the cat to do an awkward loop before landing on its feet, shaking as if it hadn't done that in years. She had never seen a cat before it wore an exosuit, but somehow it made sense here, in this city where everything was slightly broken yet insistently alive. She chuckled quietly, the sound barely disturbing the stillness. "All right, little one," she said, lifting a hand. "Try not to crash into anything too expensive." The cat mewed, a distorted robotic chirp that almost sounded like laughter. She paused at a corner where the light from a broken neon panel painted the walls in shifting blues and greens. Something tugged at her ears, a resonance, almost musical, coming from deep underground. She tilted her head, letting the vibrations trace patterns along her sensitive cartilage. A forgotten subway station yawned before her, half collapsed, with exposed conduits sparking intermittently. She descended the stairs carefully, each step a soft tap against rusted metal, careful not to trigger the unstable remnants of the infrastructure. The station smelled faintly of ozone, rust, and something she hadn't smelled in decades. The faint tang of ionized water from a broken filtration system. She crouched near a series of broken panels and began experimenting, lifting scraps of metal with her mind. Pieces of old tech floated gently, spinning, aligning, almost forming shapes that were vaguely familiar, vehicles, faces, and sometimes abstract, impossible objects that only an alien mind could comprehend. She muttered jokes to herself as the scraps collided softly and then hovered apart, and you thought humans were clumsy engineers. Occasionally, a piece of metal would wobble too far and hit the wall with a loud clang, and she would sigh dramatically, shaking her head. Yes, yes, I know physics still exists, somehow I forgot. Time passed without urgency, measured only by the flicker of failing lights and the slow decay of the city around her. She thought about leaving, about seeking out others like her, but the memory of betrayal, of the wars between her people and humans, weighed heavy. She had lost friends, allies, and perhaps a part of herself she didn't even recognize anymore. Closing her eyes had become a habit, a shield against disappointment. Yet, as she focused on the patterns of sparks, the subtle quivers of the sludge puddle, and the mechanical missteps of the hovering cat, a quiet thought persisted. Even in ruins, the world had moments of absurdity, of small, stubborn life that refused to give up. The city, abandoned as it seemed, had its own sense of humor. A malfunctioning billboard flickered, cycling through advertisements for products that had long ceased to exist. "Buy the new anti-gravity toaster, makes your breakfast float?" The sign blinked repeatedly. She snorted. "Sure, why not? Maybe it'll toast my dignity along with my bread." The echoes of her laughter bounced through the empty streets, faint but genuine. She realized she had almost forgotten the sensation entirely, the lightness of laughter, the absurdity of living even when the universe seemed to insist otherwise. A sudden vibration in the ground made her ears swivel sharply. It was subtle at first, just the soft thrum of approaching machinery. She froze, instinctively pulling her hands close to her chest. But the vibration was irregular, clumsy even, more like someone fumbling through the streets than a precise military march. A ship's engine whined somewhere above, a slightly off-pitch note that made her twitch. And then, quite abruptly, a human soldier crashed through a low-hanging doorway, tripping over an exposed cable and landing in a heap of neon sludge. He groaned, face smeared with glowing muck, and muttered something incomprehensible under his breath. For a long moment she just stared, ears quivering, the corners of her mouth tugging upward. This human, clearly not built for subtlety or grace, seemed ridiculous in every possible way. "Oh great," she said finally, voice dripping with dry amusement. "I was hoping for invaders, I got a comedy act instead." The soldier looked up, blinking, struggling to right himself. Sorry about that," he said, trying to sound formal but failing miserably as his foot slid on the puddle again. "Navigation issues." She raised an eyebrow, long ears arching like question marks. The first chapter closed not with a clash of powers, not with cries of war, but with the gentle absurdity of the world insisting on life. Metal scraps floating lazily, a robotic cat chasing its own tail, sparks crackling from broken panels, and a human soldier attempting, in his own clumsy fashion, to apologize for simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The alien girl, still wary but faintly amused, considered opening her eyes fully, if only to witness the comedy that had just entered her quiet, broken world. The human soldier lay in the puddle of glowing sludge, muttering to himself in a low, embarrassed tone that somehow carried both indignation and bewilderment. The alien girl crouched a few feet away, long ears twitching with amusement as she studied him. He tried to wipe the sludge from his uniform, but only succeeded in smearing it further across his chest and sleeves. "Do you always fall face first into everything?" she asked, voice calm but threaded with sarcasm. He froze, blinking rapidly. It's a tactical maneuver," he said, voice weak and uncertain, as if saying it out loud might convince him. "Right," she replied, gesturing vaguely at the flickering neon above them. "Because everyone knows tactical puddle diving is standard procedure in hostile environments." She couldn't help the small chuckle that escaped her throat. He tried to look indignant but tripped again on a half-submerged cable, and she winced and laughed, more out of habit than anything else. She had spent so long in solitude that absurdity had become her companion. Now it seemed someone had just walked into her theater. He finally stood, sloshing and wobbling as if gravity itself had decided to mock him. I didn't mean to intrude," he said, dusting sludge off his hands. I got lost." His voice wavered on the word lost, which seemed almost poetic in this place of forgotten streets and broken machinery. She tilted her head, long ears fanning slightly. "Lost. You're standing in the middle of a city that no one has visited in decades. Lost is expected." Her words carried no malice, just observation, and yet beneath her amusement a faint spark of curiosity flickered. Humans were unpredictable, and he was the embodiment of it. He stumbled toward a nearby panel and tried to check some device strapped to his wrist, but it emitted a series of angry beeps, smoke puffing from its surface. "Darn it," he muttered. "I just recalibrated this yesterday." The alien girl's ears twitched in rhythm with the beeps. Ah yes, calibrating human devices, very reliable, like trusting a cat to pilot a shuttle. She leaned back on her heels, floating a small shard of metal between her fingers with her mind. "Shall I fix it for you? I promise not to electroshock you, probably." He gave a lopsided smile. If you can." There was an awkward pause, during which she levitated the device gently, twisting it in the air, wires sparking softly as she adjusted circuits with the precision of a maestro. "Done," she said finally, letting it drop lightly into his hand. He looked at it, touched a button, and the device whirred back to life. "Wow, thanks," he said, genuinely impressed. His teeth caught in a half-grin which promptly turned into another stumble as he stepped on a small floating scrap and nearly toppled over again. She sighed, amused, rolling her eyes slightly. "Humans," she murmured. "So fragile. So persistent." The awkwardness of their first meeting faded gradually into a rhythm of conversation that was part teasing, part curiosity. She began showing him around the half-ruined station, pointing out glowing fungi that pulsed with bioluminescent light, remnants of long-abandoned energy cores, and malfunctioning holographic maps that flickered with impossible geometries. The soldier commented on everything with a mix of amazement and confusion. That map, it doesn't make sense. Of course it doesn't, she replied. It's from before the last three-dimensional recalibrations. We like chaos. Keeps things interesting. He tripped again, this time on a broken step, and landed in a small pool of water that sparked slightly under his touch. Do you do this to people on purpose? He asked, sputtering. Absolutely not, she said, floating a small metal cube above his head. It hovered, spinning slowly, then gave him a gentle nudge with a telekinetic flick, causing him to stumble forward again. Okay, maybe a little. But only for training. She could see the tension in him slowly unwind. Humor, it seemed, was an unintentional bridge between them. She told him small, ridiculous stories about the city's past. How a stray AI had once tried to organize a formal dance for maintenance drones. How one rogue exosuit cat had led a procession of malfunctioning machines across the city. How a meteor once passed close enough to singe the top of a building only for a holographic ad for ice cream to continue playing. He laughed at these tales, not loudly, but genuinely. And for the first time in decades, she felt a warmth in her chest that wasn't the glow of malfunctioning neon or bioluminescent moss. As night fell over the abandoned city, the neon glow softened into a gentle hum, and shadows stretched like lazy fingers along the streets. They found shelter in a partially collapsed auditorium where old projection devices still flickered to life with faint, ghostly images. The soldier settled on a broken seat, balancing carefully, and the alien girl hovered a few feet above the ground, long ears brushing faint currents of static air. She told him stories in low tones, weaving historical facts with exaggeration, ending with ridiculous punchlines that made him snort in surprise. It was strange, intimate, and entirely unexpected. "Why are you here?" he asked finally, looking up at her, genuinely curious. She paused, floating a small shard of light between her fingers. "Why am I here?" "I could ask the same of you, but you seem determined not to get lost completely." He smirked faintly, brushing glowing water off his sleeves. Determined or stubborn, there's a fine line. She tilted her head, ears flicking, sensing the subtle rhythm of his heart through the vibrations in the floor. Perhaps, but stubbornness can be useful. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Laughter, clumsy movements, shared discoveries, and small, silent acknowledgments built a fragile thread of connection between them. He asked questions, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes insightful. She answered with sarcasm, wit, and occasional flashes of honesty. Somewhere along the way, a flicker of hope began to creep into her carefully sealed mind. Perhaps all was not lost. Perhaps even the most absurd, unlikely encounters could carry the weight of possibility. By the time the first hints of dawn glowed through cracks in the broken walls, they were both exhausted, leaning against unstable structures, sharing a silence that was comfortable rather than tense. The alien girl, for the first time in what felt like centuries, opened her eyes halfway. The city looked different with open eyes, still broken, still strange, but alive. The soldier, watching her, smiled faintly, unsure if he understood the full significance, but feeling it nonetheless. And somewhere in the quiet, the distant hum of the city, the subtle vibrations underfoot, and the faint flicker of malfunctioning neon bore witness to the start of something neither of them could have predicted. A connection that might just survive the ruins, absurdity and all. The sun, or what passed for a sun in the city's broken sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the streets as the alien girl and the human soldier walked side by side. She had fully opened her eyes now, the pale green irises reflecting the neon flicker and the occasional spark of electrical fires that dotted the crumbling buildings. Her long ears swiveled in constant motion, catching the hum of stray drones and the faint thrum of subterranean energy flows. The soldier walked carefully, as if expecting some absurd hazard to leap from the ground at any moment, but she found herself quietly enjoying his nervous vigilance. He was clumsy, yes, but persistent in a way that made her heart, the odd, buried organ she'd thought dormant, beat faster. "You really think this city can survive another storm?" he asked, glancing at a section of wall that had nearly collapsed the day before. A small cloud of dust drifted lazily downward as if mocking him. She floated a few inches above the uneven pavement, idly spinning a shard of metal between her fingers. "Survive, perhaps entertain, definitely. If walls could laugh, this place would be rolling on the floor by now." He shook his head and grinned despite himself, the sound of it echoing in the hollowed streets. Their walk led them to the old energy core hub, a massive chamber half submerged in glowing sludge. The machinery inside hummed and whirred sporadically, some of it sparking and fizzing with the chaotic energy of forgotten technology. "We have to shut it down," she said, scanning the area with her mind, fingers brushing through thin streams of magnetic energy. "Or we could make it do something useful, like, say, a fireworks show for the city's ghosts." He laughed, though it ended in a cough when he slipped on a slick patch. She offered a hand, which he took reluctantly, and she pulled him upright. "Humans," she muttered under her breath. "So fragile, so entertaining." As they worked, a sudden alarm blared from the outer district. Old, automated defense drones that had been dormant for decades were activating, scanning the streets with cold, mechanical precision. She froze for only a moment, then shot him a look that mingled humor with warning. "Well, looks like someone's cranky this morning." The soldier adjusted his wrist device, which beeped angrily at him. "I think they like me," he said nervously, then tripped over a wire, sending a harmless but chaotic chain reaction of sparks across the floor. The drones hesitated, confused by the sudden display, and she laughed, a sharp, melodic sound that filled the chamber. They moved together, ducking and leaping with a rhythm that was more improvisation than strategy. She manipulated the core's energy fields, redirecting pulses to disorient the drones, while he used the wrist device to trigger the chamber's old, clunky defense mechanisms. Sparks, arcs of light, and small explosions littered the chamber, but somehow their coordination, awkward, hilarious, and entirely unexpected, kept them ahead of danger. At one point, a drone swooped at him and he barely ducked, arms flailing like a puppet. She flicked a strand of telekinetic energy at it, sending it spinning into a puddle of sludge, and he raised his arms in victory, shouting, "I did that." She rolled her eyes but laughed so hard she almost floated backward. When the last drone finally powered down, smoke curling and sparks fizzing out, they collapsed near the core, breathing hard but alive. The chamber was a mess, lights flickering, sparks still jumping from broken circuits, but for the first time she felt the odd satisfaction of accomplishment, shared with someone who had survived beside her rather than against her. "You're not terrible in a crisis," she said, voice still laced with teasing. He smirked, chest rising and falling. "I'll take that as a compliment," he replied. Hours later, they sat atop the rubble of the old city square, long ears and human ears alike catching the faint hum of distant machinery, the soft drip of melted circuits, the occasional squeak of a surviving robotic cat weaving between their legs. The alien girl turned to him, eyes reflecting both the fading neon glow and something deeper, almost unspoken. "I used to think opening my eyes was dangerous," she admitted softly. "That seeing too much would only remind me of what was lost." He nodded, understanding the weight in her tone without needing a full explanation. "And now?" he asked. "Now," she said, brushing a stray wire from her shoulder, "I see that perhaps some things are worth taking the risk." She tilted her head, ears flicking in a subtle rhythm he'd come to recognize as amusement. He grinned, leaning back on his hands, gaze following the erratic sparks and flickering lights. "Well, if risk means teaming up with me, I think I'm up for it." Days passed, though they no longer counted them with clocks or schedules. Together, they repaired broken circuits, coaxed old systems back to life, and sometimes just wandered the quiet streets, joking about absurdities. The stubbornness of malfunctioning machines, the impossibility of the city's ancient maps, or how the exosuit cat had become the de facto mayor of the ruins. The alien girl laughed more in those days than she had in decades, the sound mixing with the hum of the city in a harmony of life and absurdity. She began to teach him subtle tricks. How to sense vibrations through the ground, how to read faint magnetic pulses, how to anticipate when machinery might go rogue. And in return, he taught her about human improvisation, clumsy bravery, and how sometimes persistence mattered more than precision. The final test came when a larger threat appeared, an autonomous salvage drone squad dispatched from a distant human outpost, intent on claiming the city's remnants. It would have been overwhelming for either of them alone, but together, they improvised with ridiculous ingenuity. She sent metallic debris spinning in controlled chaos, while he triggered old turrets that fired more sparks than actual rounds. The drones, confused and overwhelmed by both brilliance and slapstick absurdity, finally powered down, leaving the city silent once again. They collapsed beside a broken fountain, laughing and panting, covered in sparks and neon sludge alike. In the quiet aftermath, the alien girl touched his shoulder lightly. "I used to close my eyes to the world," she said, voice soft, "because it hurt too much." She smiled faintly, long ears brushing against the air like delicate sails. "Now, I think I want to see it all with someone at my side." He smiled back, hand brushing hers. "And I think I'll follow wherever you lead, mostly because I don't want to trip alone."